I still remember the smell of the lilac bushes that grew wild along the fence of our family home. The way their blossoms filled the air every May and made the whole street smell like spring had arrived just for us. That house wasn't just 4 walls and a roof, it was where my entire childhood was written into the walls, where every creak in the floorboards had a story, where the peeling wallpaper in the upstairs hallway carried the fingerprints of 1,000 mornings rushing to school. My brother and I grew up there together, though if I'm honest, we always experienced that house differently. To me it was safety, warmth, the one constant in a world that always felt uncertain. To him it was a burden, something that weighed him down, another responsibility he never asked for. Our parents had passed away 3 years ago, leaving the house to both of us, but we never formally decided what to do with it. I wanted to keep it, to restore it even if it meant scraping paint with my own hands and spending every dime I had on repairs. He wanted to sell it, cash out, move on. But I thought we were in an unspoken truce. He lived his life. I kept the house alive. And maybe one day when my kids existed, they would run barefoot across the same wood floors, where I once tripped and skinned my knees. That dream shattered the morning I drove up the cracked driveway and saw a stranger's car parked out front, the kind of black SUV with dealer plates still on it. At first I thought maybe someone was lost, or maybe my brother had invited a friend over without telling me. But then I noticed the for sale sign was gone, and in its place was a cheerful little plaque by the porch that read, "The Robinsons' Home Sweet Home." My heart slammed against my ribs. I don't even remember walking to the front door, but I do remember the shock when a woman I had never seen before opened it, holding a mug of coffee like she belonged there. She smiled at me politely and asked if I was the mail carrier. I must have looked insane, standing there in my own doorway, my throat tight, my eyes stinging, my words stuck somewhere between rage and disbelief. Somehow I managed to ask her what she was doing in my house, and she laughed a little nervously and said, "Oh, we just closed last week. Your brother handled everything." Her words hit me harder than any punch ever could. My brother. My own blood. He sold the house without even telling me. All those memories, all that history, gone with the stroke of a pen I wasn't even allowed to see. I stumbled back down the steps, the world spinning, and suddenly, the lilacs didn't smell sweet anymore, they smelled like betrayal. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, but I couldn't turn the key, couldn't drive away, because I felt like if I did I would lose the last piece of my parents forever. The house was still standing there, looking exactly the same from the outside, the faded blue shutters, the crooked mailbox my dad swore he would fix one day but never did, the front steps where my mum used to sit with a glass of iced tea in the summers, waving at neighbors, telling me to come inside before the streetlights came on. To me it was sacred ground, and I couldn't wrap my head around how my brother had treated it like just another asset to unload. I called him, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hit the right buttons on my phone, and when he finally picked up his voice was calm, too calm, like he was expecting this moment but didn't care enough to fear it. I asked him how he could do this to me, how he could sell our family home without even asking, without even telling me, and all he said was, "It's just a house, you're being dramatic." Just a house. That phrase burned into me, like he had spit on every holiday we ever celebrated there, every memory I still carried like a fragile treasure. I shouted at him. I told him he had no right, that Mum and Dad would be ashamed, but he brushed it all off with this cold practicality that made me realize he had planned this for a long time. He told me I should be thanking him, that now we had money split between us, that I could finally move on, instead of clinging to the past. But he didn't understand. I wasn't clinging, I was honoring. I was keeping alive something bigger than myself, something that connected me to who I used to be. My brother had always been restless, always searching for the next thing to fill some void inside him. But I never thought he would erase my world in the process. I hung up on him before my voice cracked, before he could hear how badly he had broken me, and I sat there in the car staring at the windows of the house where I once pressed my nose against the glass waiting for my dad to pull into the driveway. Now strangers would live those moments, walk those floors, laugh in those rooms, never knowing what had been lost. I felt like I had been robbed, not just of property but of a piece of my soul. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes I saw the woman in my doorway, holding that mug of coffee, as if she had earned the right to stand there, as if my childhood didn't echo through those walls. I lay awake thinking about Christmas mornings in that living room, the smell of pine needles and cinnamon rolls, the way my dad's voice would rumble when he read the story of the Nativity, even though we all already knew it by heart. I thought of the basement where my brother and I used to build forts out of old blankets, pretending we were explorers in some distant world. And now he had sold all of that away, turned it into someone else's mortgage like it was just another line item on his financial portfolio. I kept trying to convince myself there had to be some mistake, that maybe the sale wasn't final, maybe I could fight it, but the truth was sitting in my gut like a stone. I had been cut out, ignored, betrayed in the coldest way possible. The next morning I drove by again, like some stalker circling a place that no longer belonged to her, and I saw boxes piled in the front hall through the open door. The new family was moving in, their kids running through the yard where I once learned to ride a bike, their laughter carried on the breeze like it belonged there. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and sobbed because I realized it wasn't just a house anymore, it was someone else's dream, and I had been written out of it. Later that day I dug through old drawers and found the key Mum had given me the day she and Dad signed the deed over to both of us, her voice still in my head. "This will always be your home, no matter what." The irony was so bitter it made my stomach turn. I felt like I had failed them somehow, like I should have protected the house better, fought harder, demanded more when we read the will. My brother had always been charming, persuasive, the kind of man who could talk his way through anything, and maybe I had been too soft, too trusting, believing that his love for me would keep him from crossing this line. But he had, and now I was left standing outside my own memories, watching strangers unpack them box by box, until nothing of me remained inside. The hardest part wasn't even seeing strangers inside the house, it was realizing how little my brother seemed to care about what he had done to me. When I finally forced myself to call him again, hoping maybe some part of him regretted the way he went about it, he answered with that same flat tone, like we were discussing the weather instead of the destruction of everything that had anchored me to our past. He told me I was being overly sentimental, and that holding on to an old, crumbling house made no sense when the market was so good right now. I could hear clinking glasses and laughter in the background, like he was out celebrating the sale while I was mourning a funeral. I wanted to scream at him, to remind him of the nights we sat in that kitchen during thunderstorms, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder until Mum would bring us hot cocoa and Dad would tease us for being scared. I wanted to tell him how the smell of laundry soap in the upstairs hallway still made me feel safe, because it meant Mum was nearby. But I realized none of that meant anything to him anymore. To him it was drywall and shingles, to me it was blood and bone. I drove by again the following week, and this time I parked across the street, watching the new owners plant flowers under the porch steps, digging into the soil where Dad once tried to grow tomatoes and failed miserably every summer. My chest ached watching them claim it so easily, as if history was something that could be erased with fresh paint and petunias. I pressed my hands together and whispered an apology to Mum and Dad, telling them I had tried, even if no one else understood. I started to wonder if maybe I had been wrong to expect my brother to share my grief, my reverence for that place. Maybe he had cut ties with our past long ago and I just hadn't noticed. But deep inside, under all the heartbreak, something else began to take shape. Anger, sharp and alive, growing like weeds through the cracks. I promised myself I wouldn't just let him walk away from this as if he hadn't torn out my heart. He thought it was just money, just business, but for me it was betrayal carved into my very identity, and I knew in that moment that I would find a way to make him face what he had done, whether he wanted to or not. I started digging through every piece of paper I had left from when Mum and Dad passed, every folder, every envelope that had once felt too heavy to open, because it meant accepting that they were really gone. Late into the night I spread everything across my kitchen table, lit only by a small lamp, the same lamp I had taken from the living room of the house before my brother rushed in and started boxing things up. There were old utility bills, copies of the deed, letters from the lawyer, and a yellowing envelope with Mum's handwriting on it. Just seeing her script made my throat close up, her loops and swirls so familiar, like she was speaking directly to me through ink. Inside was a note she had written to both of us, telling us that no matter what happened, the house was meant to keep us together, to be our anchor in a world that would try to scatter us. She wrote, "Take care of each other, and take care of this home, because it is part of who you are." Reading those words felt like a knife and a lifeline at the same time. I realized that my brother hadn't just betrayed me, he had betrayed her too. I stayed up until dawn, researching property laws, digging through emails with the lawyer, trying to figure out how he could have signed papers without me, how he could have possibly pushed a sale through without my signature. When I finally called the lawyer, bleary-eyed and clutching my coffee like a shield, he explained in a careful voice that my brother had used a loophole, claiming I was unreachable, that he had full authority as co-owner to move forward. Technically legal, maybe, but morally vile. I sat there in silence, listening to the lawyer drone on about how hard it would be to challenge now that the sale was finalized, how the courts rarely overturn such things. My heart sank but then hardened, because if I couldn't get the house back, then I would make sure my brother at least felt the weight of what he had done. I couldn't just let him slip away into his new life with a pocket full of money and no consequences. That wasn't going to be the ending to this story. Not if I had anything to say about it. In the days that followed, I found myself haunted not just by memories of the house but by flashes of my brother's face when we were kids, his crooked grin when he managed to sneak cookies from the jar without Mum noticing, the way he'd protect me from bullies on the walk home from school. Those memories made his betrayal feel even sharper, like the boy I once trusted more than anyone had been erased by the man who sold our family's history to the highest bidder. I couldn't escape the ache in my chest whenever I drove past the old neighborhood, so one evening I parked at the corner and walked slowly past the house, like a ghost lingering where she didn't belong. Through the lit windows I could see the new family settling in, their furniture already rearranged, their photos hanging on walls that once held our own. It felt surreal, like watching a stage play of someone else's life in the exact same set where mine had been performed. I thought of Dad, standing at the grill in the backyard, smoke curling into the summer air, while Mum carried out pitchers of lemonade, her laugh echoing off the fences. And now those echoes were gone, buried under layers of someone else's story. That night, when I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop, my anger sharpening into determination. I started combing through financial records, tracing where the money from the sale had gone, because if my brother thought he could erase me, he was wrong. I found out quickly he hadn't just sold the house, he had already put down a deposit on some flashy condo downtown, complete with a rooftop pool and valet parking. He was out celebrating, throwing away our past in exchange for shiny marble countertops. My hands trembled with fury, but beneath it all there was also this cold clarity. He had made his choice and now I was going to make mine. I wasn't going to sit back quietly. If the courts wouldn't undo the sale, I would find another way to make him regret what he had done. Maybe it wouldn't give me back my home, but at least it would give me back a sense of power that he had ripped away when he locked me out of the life I had known. And deep down I felt Mum's words still guiding me. Take care of each other, she had said. Well, maybe the only way left to take care of us was to make sure he finally understood the damage he had caused. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my brother had underestimated me. He probably assumed I'd cry, maybe yell at him a few times, and then eventually let it go the way I always had when he pulled selfish stunts in the past. But this wasn't a broken promise or a missed birthday. This was the erasure of everything sacred to me. I spent nights piecing together a plan, not with the reckless anger that burned in the first days, but with a cold, deliberate clarity. I started small, talking to neighbors near the old house, slipping into conversations that revealed details about the sale, about how quickly it had all been arranged, about how little time had passed between the listing and the closing. People were shocked when I told them I hadn't even been informed, and part of me took comfort in their outrage, like at least someone else could see how twisted it was. I also reached out to the local paper, not naming names yet but asking hypothetical questions about co-owned property disputes, and the journalist on the other end seemed intrigued, hinting that cases like mine sometimes made for compelling human interest stories. The thought of my brother's reputation being dragged through the mud gave me a small spark of satisfaction, because if money was what he loved, then his shiny image mattered to him too. Still, I couldn't shake the deeper wound, the loneliness of realizing that my only sibling had chosen greed over me. Late at night I would sit on my couch, holding Mum's old quilt, tracing the worn stitching she had mended 100 times, and I would cry not just for the house but for the family I thought I still had. Yet those tears eventually dried into something stronger. One afternoon I drove past his new condo, the gleaming glass tower reaching arrogantly into the sky, and I thought of him sipping cocktails by the rooftop pool, pretending he was untouchable. That image hardened something inside me. I whispered to myself in the car, "You don't get to win this easily." I didn't know exactly what form my revenge would take yet, legal, public or personal, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't done, and neither was this story. A week later I forced myself to meet him in person, partly because I needed to look him in the eye, partly because I wanted to see if there was even a shred of guilt hiding under that polished exterior he carried everywhere. We sat across from each other in a cafe downtown, a place with shiny marble tables and overpriced lattes, the kind of place he loved because it made him feel important. I could barely touch my drink, my stomach was twisted into knots, but he sipped his cappuccino like nothing in the world was wrong. When I asked him why, really why, he had gone behind my back, his answer was so casual it made my skin crawl. He said, "Because you would have tried to stop me, and I didn't want the drama." Just like that, as if stealing my memories and ripping apart the promise Mum left us was nothing more than avoiding a slightly uncomfortable conversation. My hands shook under the table and I had to grip my knees to keep from lashing out. I told him I had found Mum's letter, that she wanted the house to bind us together, not divide us. For the briefest second I thought I saw his jaw tighten, his eyes flicker, but then he laughed, and said, "Mum's dead. It's time to live in the real world, not her fantasies." Those words broke something in me. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about respect, about love, about every bond I thought we had as siblings. I leaned across the table and told him, low and steady, that he might think he won, but this wasn't over. He smirked and called me dramatic again, brushing me off like I was a child throwing a tantrum. As he stood to leave, I watched him walk out, his tailored jacket catching the light, and I realized that the boy who once held my hand during nightmares was gone, replaced by a man who didn't care who he hurt to get what he wanted. I sat there for a long time after he left, staring at the foam on my untouched coffee, my chest hollow but my mind racing. That was the moment I decided I would hit him where it hurt most, not with fists or screams, but with consequences. If he wanted to treat me like I was invisible, I would remind him just how visible I could be when the truth came to light. After that meeting, I couldn't shake the sound of his laugh, that cruel dismissal of everything I held sacred, and it played over and over in my head like a broken record. I knew then that I couldn't just keep grieving quietly while he moved into his shiny new life. So I began gathering every document, every piece of evidence, every scrap of proof that showed how he had maneuvered behind my back. I made copies of the deed, the will, the letter Mum had written, and I even contacted the neighbors who remembered me being the one who maintained the house after our parents died. They were willing to write statements, to say I had been the one caring for the property, while my brother had disappeared for months at a time. I went further, speaking to the journalist I'd hinted at before, and when I told her the full story, her eyes widened, like she had just been handed a headline dripping with betrayal. She told me people love stories like this, family torn apart by greed, the sacred versus the selfish. She asked if I was ready to go public, to let the town know what kind of man my brother really was. I hesitated, because airing family wounds in public felt dirty, like a betrayal of its own. But then I thought of his words. Mum's dead. Time to live in the real world. If he had no respect for her memory, why should I protect his? The idea of exposing him gave me a small pulse of satisfaction, but I knew I had to be strategic. So I started slow, sharing pieces with people I trusted, letting the story circulate in whispers before it became a storm. At the same time, I consulted another lawyer, one who specialized in estate disputes, and though he admitted the sale was hard to reverse, he also hinted there might be grounds for damages if I could prove my brother had deliberately misled the process. Even the faint chance of dragging him through court gave me strength. At night I lay in bed clutching Mum's quilt, whispering to her that I wouldn't let him erase us, that I would fight in whatever way I could. I wasn't naive. I knew this wouldn't bring the house back, but I also knew that sometimes justice wasn't about winning the war, it was about making sure the person who hurt you never forgot the cost of their betrayal. The first ripple hit sooner than I expected. A neighbor from our old street called me out of the blue one morning, her voice hushed but tinged with curiosity, saying she had heard that my brother sold the house without even telling me. She asked if it was true, and when I confirmed it, there was this long silence before she whispered, "Your parents would never have wanted this." That simple statement ignited something inside me because it meant the story was spreading, that people were beginning to see him for what he had done. Later that week, the journalist I had spoken to sent me a draft of the article she was planning to publish, and seeing the words in black and white, "Sister cut out of family home sale," made the whole nightmare feel both surreal and vindicating. I could already imagine my brother's face when the paper came out, when his colleagues at work or his new condo neighbors read about how he had betrayed his only sibling. But even as I felt that surge of triumph, there was still a hollow ache that no amount of revenge could fill. I drove past the house again one evening, and saw the new family decorating for Halloween. Stringing orange lights across the porch, where Dad used to carve pumpkins with us, his hands covered in seeds and pulp, while Mum made spice cider inside. I stood there in the dark, clutching the steering wheel, tears blurring the sight of their laughter, and I realized that no matter how many articles were written, or how much shame my brother endured, the one thing I wanted most, to walk through that door and feel like I was home again, was gone forever. Still, I couldn't let him win without consequence. I pressed forward, filing papers with the lawyer to contest how the sale had been conducted, even if it meant months of legal battles. When my brother found out, he stormed into my apartment unannounced, his face red with fury, shouting that I was trying to ruin his life. For the first time, I didn't shrink back. I stood up and told him that he had already ruined mine the day he sold our parents' house behind my back. The look in his eyes was pure rage, but beneath it I saw a flicker of something else, fear. Maybe for the first time, he realized I wasn't going to roll over and disappear. And that tiny shift, that moment where he understood I was serious, gave me the strength to keep going, even if it cost me everything. The lawsuit dragged on for weeks that turned into months, and every time I sat across from my brother in that sterile courtroom, I felt the weight of our childhood pressing down on me. I would catch glimpses of his face in the harsh fluorescent light, and for brief moments I'd see the boy who once patched up my scraped knees with band-aids he stole from Mum's bathroom cabinet, the boy who promised me he'd always have my back. But then his lawyer would lean over and whisper something, and that boy would vanish, replaced by the smug man who had traded family for money. The judge listened patiently as my lawyer argued that I had been deliberately cut out of the sale, that my brother had manipulated the process and abused a loophole. And though I could tell the odds were stacked against me, the simple act of speaking the truth felt like reclaiming something I had lost. Outside the courthouse, people began to notice. The article had already circulated widely, and whispers followed my brother wherever he went. A mutual friend told me he had been passed over for a promotion at work because the company didn't want bad press. Another said he had stopped showing up at his usual bars and restaurants because people were asking too many questions. It was a small victory, but it was enough to keep me going. One evening after a long day in court, I drove past the old house again. The porch light was glowing softly, the curtains drawn tight, and for a moment I imagined Mum standing there in her robe, waving me inside, telling me not to stay out in the cold. The ache in my chest was so deep, I had to pull over and sit with my head against the steering wheel. I whispered to her that I was sorry, that I couldn't protect the home she had loved, but that I was doing my best to honor her by fighting. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a strange sense of peace. Maybe I would never walk through that door again. Maybe the house would never belong to me. But at least my brother would never get to erase me the way he had planned. At least he would carry the shadow of his betrayal with him. A reminder that money could buy him marble countertops and city views, but it couldn't buy back his soul. The final hearing came on a grey morning in late November, the kind where the sky feels too heavy, and the air carries the bite of winter. I sat in the courtroom clutching Mum's letter in my hands, the paper soft from being unfolded too many times, and listened as the judge declared that the sale would stand. My heart sank even though I had prepared myself for this outcome, because part of me had still hoped for a miracle, for the chance to unlock that front door again and step back into the life I had lost. But then, the judge turned to my brother and scolded him sharply, reminding him that while the law might allow what he did, morality and decency were another matter. For the first time in months, my brother couldn't meet my eyes, and that moment was worth more than any legal victory. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, cameras flashing, microphones shoved toward me, and I told them the truth, that this was never about money, that it was about love, memory, and the sacredness of family. My words spread faster than I ever imagined, and suddenly everyone knew my brother, not as the successful businessman he liked to portray, but as the man who betrayed his own sister to line his pockets. That stain clung to him, and no matter how hard he tried to polish his image, it lingered. I didn't get the house back, but I got something else. My voice, my strength, the knowledge that I hadn't let him erase me. In the weeks that followed, I stopped driving past the old street. I realized that clinging to the sight of strangers in those rooms was only deepening the wound. Instead, I began keeping the house alive inside me, telling stories about it to friends, writing down memories of the backyard, the lilac bushes, The way Dad's laugh filled the halls. One night, I lit a candle and laid Mum's letter beside it, whispering to her that I had kept my promise, that I hadn't let him destroy me, and that in my heart, the house would always belong to us. I don't know if what I did counts as revenge or simply survival, but I do know this: I walked away stronger, sharper, and no longer afraid of my brother's shadow. He sold the house, but he could never sell the bond I still carry with my parents, nor the fire he lit in me by trying to take it all away. And maybe that was my victory after all.